Welcome! In this video, I will cover pies from Chapter 33 in your On Cooking textbook. While there are many different variations of pie dough, the basic ingredients in most pie doughs include flour, fat, salt, and water, and each has its own purpose. We'll start with flour. Pastry flour is commonly used. When you consider the gluten development in your different flours, using a bread flour would result tougher crust, whereas a cake flour might not have enough structure to hold your pie. In regards to the fat used in pie doughs, really taste and how manageable it is the most important factors. For regular shortening, your vegetable shortening, it is firm and easy to mold, and you can use it at various temperatures. However, it does leave a film in your mouth and an aftertaste. Emulsified shortening blends too quickly here, and emulsified shortening is usually used for high ratio formulas, such as with your cakes. Butter, then, does add that flavor, but it does melt and it's a little tougher to work with. I personally prefer using butter. You can get a shortening that is flavored with butter or combine butter and shortening. Also, butter does add to the overall cost. Salt, then, is necessary as a tenderizer and to add some flavor. Sometimes it could be dissolved in the water for more even distribution or spread throughout the flour to make sure that it is evenly distributed. Water, then, is important because as you are adding that moisture, now you are starting to develop that gluten. It must be added cold to maintain the dough temperature to be colder and keep that butter or fat harder. You can add milk, however, it browns a little quicker and adds a richer taste to your dough, but again, it adds some more money and will make the dough a little bit softer. The temperature is important. Again, you want to keep it cold to make sure that your butter doesn't make your dough extra sticky and cause extra flour to be absorbed. The basic 3-2-1 dough is a recipe that is used widely. 3 parts flour to 2 parts fat and 1 part water. So that would be 3 pounds of flour, 2 pounds of butter, let's say, and 1 pound of ice-cold water. You would combine your flour and salt in the bowl and then cut in your cold fat. Some chefs prefer to cut their fat ahead of time, and some prefer to put it in whole and cut it right directly into the flour. You would add the water a little bit at a time, as you wouldn't need all of it depending on how much the flour has incorporated in with the fat. The more flour you have exposed, the more water you will need. The more flour that is incorporated with the fat, the less that is available to soak up that water. That'll be important in a minute as we talk about 2 different types. You will mix and knead a couple times and then place it in plastic wrap or in a bowl covered, refrigerate it and let it rest for about an hour, 15 minutes I would say at the minimum. Then roll it out on a floured surface and transfer to your pie tin. There are several types of pie doughs. Flaky crusts and mealy crusts, which you could use the 3-2-1 dough with that we just discussed, and crumb crusts, which really is a matter of taking some different ingredients and forming a crust rather than making a dough as we've been discussing so far. Short dough, then, is actually, I like to call it a half 1-2-3 dough. It's a richer dough used for smaller fruit tarts, such as your pâté sucré dough, where it is incorporating eggs as well as the fat, flour, and moisture. The difference between flaky and mealy dough, then, is flaky generally has larger pieces of fat still left in that bowl before you add the water. They're more of a hazelnut size. These large pieces of fat, then, as they're baked off, will result in a flakier product. It's used mainly for top crusts and pre-baked crusts because it will absorb more moisture as it's baking and possibly could have a soggy bottom crust for you. Your mealy dough, then, is when you're actually incorporating your fat in with the flour more to the resembling a coarse cornmeal you'll often hear. There's less gluten development here because less water can be absorbed, so you get a tender dough and it won't become as soggy of a bottom crust, and that's generally what it's used for, bottom crust. I prefer the flaky dough, in that, again, it has that bigger pockets of fat, better flavor, and the texture tends to be a lot better as well. For baked pies, you would use that raw pie shell and then fill it with a prepared filling and bake it. You can have fruit pies that have a top crust or a lattice crust, and you could have custards such as your quiches, or one of my favorites is a coconut custard pie. Generally, they're just single crusts and do not have one on top. Then you have your unbaked pies. Your unbaked pies typically would have your pie shell pre-baked in a blind baking fashion. There's a video following that will cover blind baking. These would be for cream pies or chiffon pies, pies that won't be baked further once they have been incorporated into the shell. To avoid that soggy bottom that I mentioned, using mealy dough is the key to where it won't absorb too much extra moisture. In using bottom heat, I prefer to add a sheet tray into the oven as it's preheating and add my pie directly to that sheet tray. It adds that additional heat from that tray directly onto the pie tin or the pie pan and starts to cook that crust immediately. You never want to add your hot fillings to the raw pie shells. It'll make your fat melt and make your dough completely spread out. Some like to use dark metal pie tins, thinking that it'll absorb the heat the best and again get that crust starting to cook. When you are pre-baking pie crusts, it is important to make sure that you dock the dough, pricking it with a fork to allow, I should say not allow, those bubbles to form and pop up as it's baking. Generally, you're going to blind bake it with some parchment paper, filling it with beans or baking rice, whatever your medium would be, and then baking it off, removing those when it's just about done, and then possibly egg washing it and finishing it off in the oven. There's different starches to use with your different pies. Cornstarch is an extremely popular one, as well as waxy maize, which really freezes well if you're planning to freeze your pie. There are some other instant starches. Your instant tapioca is a popular one as well. When you're cooking your starches, it's important to note that your sugars and strong acids that you typically would have with pies, with your fruits, it really affects the thickening power of the starch. So it's important, if possible, to thicken your product and then add the extra sugars or at least the extra acids afterwards. Different fruit fillings will have obviously some different fruits. There's juices and sugars, spices, and usually some type of a thickener involved. The fruits could be fresh, frozen, canned, or dried. If you're looking for your frozen fruits, you'll have a consistent quality and they should be available normally. Your canned products will have an consistent quality, but they will have a much different texture, as well as depending on what they are sitting in, what liquid, they may have a different flavor and be additionally sweet as well. So fresh are great as long as it's within season. Otherwise, I would say your frozen is probably your second best choice. There's also dried cranberries, raisins. Adding some dried fruits right into your pies is also a great addition. Make sure you rehydrate them first, or they will absorb all of that moisture in your pie, causing it to be pretty dry. There are several different methods of cooking fruits. You could either drain the juice in the cooked juice method and thicken that juice. Something like a raspberry pie. If I was using frozen raspberries, probably wouldn't be my best choice, but those raspberries would really break down. So I would want to let them thaw gently and then form them into the pie shell, take my juice off of that, thicken that, and then pour that gently over top of those raspberries. That way it can solidify and cool, and I'm not actually stirring around and damaging those berries. The cooked fruit method then is when I am taking, let's say that I have fresh strawberries and I just want to soften them a little bit and cause some juice, adding some different flavorings to it. I'm going to put them in a saucepan, add some liquid as well as some other flavorings, cooking them quickly, and then transferring it to, again, a pre-baked pie shell and letting that completely cool then. The old-fashioned method is how my grandmother taught me to bake an apple pie, where I take my apples. My favorite is Pink Lady to use. I actually leave the skins on them. They're more nutritious, as well as much easier for me to prepare quickly. And then I'll mix them with some cinnamon, sugar, nutmeg. I put a little orange juice in mine and cornstarch. Mix that together, put it into my unbaked pie shell, and then I prefer to do a lattice top on top that I egg wash and then put some sugar. I'm sure there are many, many different pies, and I'm anxious to see what everyone would create on their own. Thank you.